Good afternoon. In April of 2014, a little over 10 years ago, the Airline Pilots Association got a little bit bigger and a little bit bluer, with JetBlue becoming, at the time, ALPA's 32nd pilot group, and arguably, with the blue shirts, the best looking one. You'd be surprised, though, how difficult it is to get those blue shirts. Show of hands here, how many of you were at your current airline when JetBlue joined ALPA? All right. How about with another carrier within ALPA? Interesting. A lot has changed in those 10 years. We now stand at 41 pilot groups, sadly, down from the 43 in January due to the closing of Lynx and iAero. However, there has been a lot of movement over the decade as well, with 24 pilot groups joining ALPA. That means, this could be really dangerous being the finance guy trying to do somewhat public math here, 15 pilot groups moving the other direction, including a number of our pilot groups either through mergers or the closure of their airlines. However, check out this graph from the April edition of the Airline Pilots magazine that showcases our impressive growth. JetBlue joining ALPA brought our membership to over 51,000. 10 short years later, we've surpassed 77,000, as this graph shows. It's truly amazing. As you can imagine, ALPA's growth has shown up in all areas, including our finances. Our budgets are higher, our expenses are higher, but we continue to budget and spend responsibly. It is, as we often say, our pilot dues money, and we owe them that responsibility. Take a look at this comparison of the 2013 finances presented at the Spring 2014 Executive Board and a sneak peek of what I'll be showing you later from 2023. But with the growth of the association, we've been able to make a lot of improvements, very important improvements for our pilots as well. We've increased the resources and services we provide our members. Over the past few years, we've introduced new programs, grants, and policies that allow the association, from top to bottom, more access to our hard-earned dues dollars on things that will make our volunteers and members' quality of work, contracts, and lives even better. And as I'm sure you're all aware, as Jason mentioned earlier, last month we announced that we will be returning $50 million of surplus dues back to our members. To reiterate what Jason said, this money will come entirely from ALPA's administrative and support account funds and does not inhibit individual MECs from offering to return funds from significant MEC account balances if they're eligible. You all played a big role in ALPA being able to do this for our members. A majority of our MECs are carrying healthy surpluses so far. So you are responsible budgeting, you're responsible budgeting, if I can get the words out of my mouth. Your responsible budgeting has put the association in a position where we were comfortable returning these funds to our members rather than keeping them as a backstop for our MECs. I'm extremely proud of the work we have all been able to do to put ALPA in a better financial position than it has ever been. However, we're not done yet. One of my roles as your Vice President of Finance Treasurer is to chair the Structure, Systems, and Financial Review Committee, or SAFER. With the pilot members of the committee and staff from ALPA's finance, legal, and governing bodies departments, we've enacted some long-needed updates and improvements to ALPA policies and financial processes. At this executive board, the SAFER committee has submitted several resolutions that you will be voting on this week, and you'll be able to get more information on them in your delegate committee. But I wanted to highlight a few of them in my remarks. Our overreaching goal with these changes is to make ALPA policy clearer and up to date so it makes more sense in today's world. We are also placing a strong focus on transparency. Now that our local council budgets are able to fund flight pay loss for their volunteers and hopefully, after this meeting, host family awareness events, we're recommending provision that allows the MEC Secretary Treasurer access and visibility into the LEC budget reports. To be clear, this only applies when your MEC passes a resolution to allow LEC funds for flight pay loss. After all, the MEC budget, as hopefully you're aware, is the backstop for LEC deficits, so it makes sense to suggest this change. They have to be able to know what's going on before they make these approvals. We're also putting forth a resolution to mandate that MECs publicly share utilized flight pay loss hours on their pilot group's website at least quarterly. This type of transparency with our members is necessary to build trust. Finally, you'll see a resolution centered on creating some policy around the sharing of GoFundMe campaigns. These are becoming more popular, and as our pilot groups ask for guidance on sharing or promoting individual campaigns, we realized that establishing a standard policy would take legal risk away from the association, but while also allowing MECs to share information if they so desire. In addition to my role as your treasurer and chair of the SAFER, I had another opportunity responsibility added to my lineup this year as the National Officer Coordinator for the newly created President's Committee. And as being an industry guy, pretty much most of my ALPA career, I was super excited to take on this role. This, by the way, is another area where the growth of ALPA has allowed us to increase our services to our members. My colleague at JetBlue, Captain David Kidder, has been named the chair, and I remain involved as part of my national officer responsibilities. The President's Grievance Committee was established to offer guidance, provide resources, and promote best practices to our pilot group level grievance committees. It's really hard to believe we've gone this long without a national committee. It was really eye-opening as well to see how every MEC does it slightly different, where they have issues or non-issues, or some MECs are doing better. So hopefully this committee will help that. Too often we've had pilot groups expend their funds, negotiating capital, and sweat equity to earn the contract, only to see it weakened during implementation or being completely violated by management. The President's Grievance Committee aims to assist our pilot groups in providing our members with the support they need to protect the contract they earned, negotiated, and ratified. I think this will prove to be an extremely valuable resource for our association, and I look forward to working with David and the rest of the committee. Gotta take a drink, because now is the moment you've all surely been waiting for, the financial PowerPoints. As much as I detest death by PowerPoint, at least a few are necessary to showcase our current financial position. As you see here, the association finished last year with a net surplus of $116.8 million. This surplus is divided between MEC surpluses and the ANS surplus. That's largely on the heels of a record $314.4 million in dues revenue, though 50 million of that will be going back to our pilots as previously discussed. There are a lot of contributing factors to the surplus, including conservative investments by our investment management committee. Much of it's still a result of the rebound from the pandemic. Typically, we see our contract negotiations somewhat spread out throughout the year, but during the pandemic, a lot of these negotiations were put on pause and they all kind of came together at once. What that meant was that more pilot groups were negotiating contracts at roughly the same time. And with the industry rebounding as strongly as it did, it meant that we were earning more in those contracts, up to and including Delta, WestJet, and United contracts that contributed greatly. Together, that helped provide us with our record surplus. This shows you our year-to-date finances through March 31st. Our net surplus is $45.3 million, which I should mention is higher than our year-to-date position at the same point last year. There's a lot to look at here, but these next few slides illustrate our monthly dues revenue and expenses, actual versus budgeted, with last year and current year-to-date data shown together. The dotted lines represent the 2023 dues revenue, budgeted in red and actual in blue. As you can see, we remained above budgeted dues throughout the year as new contracts were signed. The same holds true for 2024 through March as well, with actual dues shown as solid green line, outpaced the budgeted dues shown as the yellow solid line, due primarily to new contracts enacted after the budget projection was made last summer. It's worth pointing out the wild fluctuations in actual dues each month. Those bumps you see, for example, reflect Delta's new contract in March of 2023, United's in October of the same year, and then Delta's profit sharing from this current year. At the same time, actual revenue outpaces budgeted throughout the chart, reflecting both our desire to budget conservatively as well as the major contractual gains. This graph shows the cumulative amount of our dues income, both budgeted and actual. For 2023 and year-to-date 2024, the red dotted line was our budgeted dues progression for 2023, and that blue dotted line shows the actual receipt of dues revenue by the association. As you can see, as the year went on, the gap between budget and actual dues continued to grow. It is also worth noting that our budget for 2024 closely matches the actual 2023 dues rate, and that we are that we continue to outpace budget year to date so far. We'll review the same exercise now with our budgeted and actual expenses. As you can see here, expenses are a little more volatile than dues, as the association, while our events that we do aren't evenly spread throughout the calendar year. That high in March last year, for example, is due partly because of the ALPA-ACPA merger and expenses associated with finalizing that, but we typically see a bump each February for the expenses related to the leadership training conference, and in the summer around the Air Safety Forum, and then again every other October for the Board of Directors meetings. And again, we look at the cumulative amount of expenses over the year. You can see that last year's expenses ended up higher than budgeted. Much of that is due to the growth of ALPA has seen and the costs associated to support additional members of the association. We also continue to see an increased cost associated with the simple act of just getting back together to regular business, including air travel, which is a big one. It's really on the rise right now, air travel, as we exited the pandemic. Such as with multiple negotiations that were delayed during the pandemic is starting to pick up back up. So far this year, our expenses are falling below budget, though we will see a bump later this year with the Board of Directors meeting and the related expenses. This slide kind of puts it all together for you. In order, you see budgeted dues, budgeted expenses, and actual expenses for years 2019 through 2023 and the year-to-date to 2024. That orange bar for 2023 reflects our ability to return that $50 million to our members. Even with that reduction, our actual dues came out ahead of budgeted. Moving on from the budget, let's talk about the MCF. I want to next share some figures from the Major Contingency Fund, the MCF. As you can see in this slide, we have nearly tripled the balance of the MCF in the last decade. Our leadership team at the time made rebuilding the MCF a priority in 2015, and this goes to show what we do when we prioritize our goals. With this current leadership team, and particularly with the SAFER Committee, we've set out to explore new and different ways to use funds in the MCF. With so many contracts achieved last year, many of you hopefully are familiar with the contract implementation grants, providing our pilot groups with funds after signing a new contract or a major agreement. These funds are provided to make sure you're able to implement a new agreement properly and fund any necessary education or grievances with the company. The committee continues to explore new ways to use this war chest, including more access during negotiations without having to expend all of your funds. We're looking at a potential cost-sharing proposal that's working its way through the governing bodies and system currently. Finally, we have the OCF, the Operating Contingency Fund. The OCF is one of the many great benefits of a pilot group belonging to ALPA. It's your backstop, your financial overdraft protection, essentially, should circumstances put your MEC budget in a deficit fiscal position. In 2023, 6 MECs received funds from the operating fund to support their negotiations, and 6 MECs accessed the contingency fund to support deficit account balances conditions experienced by their MEC. I will note that a majority of those OCF, the contingency funds, were new Canadian carriers without contracts that weren't paying dues prior to our old language. That's where a lot of it went at the time. Right now, our MECs are running really healthy. I think we only have 2 that are dipping into the contingency funding at this time. For 2024, 7 MECs have received initial operating fund for negotiations. And then once again, there's been 6 of your MECs doing contingency fund allocations made year to date. Last slide here. Here you can see our headquarters building fund balance. You see here the history thus far of our new building fund with the annual contributions noted. Our current balance in this fund is $8.4 million, with the balance expected to be at $15 million by the end of the year. This fund is in place, so as we approach the end of our lease here at Vallow Park, ALPA leadership will have saved up resources, not saying it has to be enough to pay for a new building or whatever we decide to do, but at least some saved up resources to explore and implement any decisions made related to the location of the association's headquarters. We're simply being prepared to have all options available. Okay, so all those slides show ALPA is in an extremely strong financial position. We weathered the pandemic and have experienced record-setting revenues in recent years. That's due in no small part to the hard work and preparation put in by all our volunteers and staff over the past decade. We are not in the position where we are now without that planning and preparation. With that said, We must always be planning for the future, for the next year, 5 years, 10 years, and beyond. Together with the members of the SAFER Committee, we're going to continue to explore ways to make ALPA's financial policies and procedures transparent and relevant while remaining responsible. Being responsible with our members' dues dollars includes making sure we're not taking too much. So we're also going to be doing a review of our dues structure, and trust me when I say everything is on the table. We've already announced a return of dues to be paid this year, which evolved out of the beginning of these conversations with SAFER. We're discussing potential future returns, which could result in a form of a variable dues rate and essentially leads to what is an effective dues reduction. I said it earlier, but it bears repeating. I'm extremely proud of the work we have all been able to do together to make ALPA better than it has ever been. And I'm excited to see what we're going to be able to do next. Thank you very much for your time.